Welcome to the Peak Revival podcast. My name is Vesna and I'm joined by my co-host Melissa, who is the coach in my programs. Today we're going to talk about the myth of pathology ranges, such as your pathology tests. There's nothing more frustrating for a woman who walks out of her doctor's appointment to be told that everything looks fine when she feels terrible. So let's get started. Welcome, Melissa. Thank you for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a really interesting conversation to be having today because as somebody who runs the accelerator portion of your program, we see this so often with women coming in saying, my pathology is normal, my doctors told me everything is normal, but I'm still feeling awful. What is happening there?
Yeah, it's funny because me and Melissa were talking yesterday as we were prepping for this, and I was like, how many women? I said, you would hear this. How many women are told in the program that, you know, they've been to their doctor, they looked at their pathology and everything looks normal? How many women? And she said,
almost all of them, yes. It's so much more common than people think because I think there's just so much faith put into the conventional medicine system where if my pathology tests come back, it's a yes or a no, it's a black and a white. And I think our health is so much more complicated than that. It isn't just a black and a white answer. And there are so many other cofactors that go into determining what makes us feel well and what makes us feel unwell. So looking into the kind of more myths of what's going on in that pathology is a really interesting topic.
I guess the purpose of this podcast episode is to shine a little bit of light on where you're at. So if you've been to the GP or you've been to your physician and you've had your pathology results looked at and told everything's fine, and you walk out of there really kind of confused because you know you're not fine. You know something is wrong. A woman knows her body better than a GP, better than a doctor, okay? Because you live in it all day long. It is very common to hear that, and there's a number of reasons which we're going to talk about today. But for you to know that, you know, through this episode that where you're at is probably more common than not. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that there's no imbalances going on inside your body. There actually are things that you can pick up on, which will be a way to pinpoint why you have the symptoms that you do, and then becomes part of your treatment plan, right? On how to correct those imbalances that are leading to your symptoms so you can get back to feeling, you know, better than you've ever felt. The biggest issue with pathology tests is that they're so basic. So when you go to the GP, like they just, cholesterol, sugar, you know, full blood count, kidney function, which is important. So that's your minerals, but it's so basic. And so you're not really seeing anything there. And it depends on the GP as well, or on the doctor or the primary physician, right? So it really depends on what they're going to decide to test on, mm-hmm. right? And that's really different from doctor to doctor, 100%. And if you walk away with a very basic assessment, you're not going to see anything.
Can you give me an example of a conventional pathology range versus an optimal range? Because we talk about what is the truth about normal ranges, and most people assume that normal means healthy, but what you're saying is that there is actually something else kind of going on there, and there could be further investigation into what's happening. So first off, I guess, what are the reference ranges that we're receiving in the conventional system, and how are those measured? And then is there an example of a conventional pathology versus an optimal range?
Yeah, so firstly, to look at the pathology ranges, where do they come from, right? And they're based on the average of people who have their blood checked. And people normally go to the doctor to have their blood checked when they're sick. So it's the average of sick people. So there's nothing optimal about it, right? So therefore, you know, you can go there and you'll still be in these very broad ranges. For example, to give an example, like a thyroid test, you know, the TSH, you could be up in the 4s and they go, everything looks normal. But we're looking between 1 and 2 TSH levels as being optimal. And that's one marker. So if that comes back normal according to them, in that range, they won't do any further investigation, and it'll be tough to press them for further investigation because they're bound by Medicare and things like that. But that doesn't really tell you anything. I have clients with severe Hashimoto's, an autoimmune condition of the thyroid, that have normal TSH levels. And so it's not an accurate picture of what's going on. So yeah, the ranges are based on the average of sick people. So they're not optimal ranges. And so you can, particularly for women, it can take years for a woman to get a proper diagnosis. up to 5 years. You could be within those ranges. You could, one, not have the proper markers checked. Two, you could be within those ranges but be at a very suboptimal level and you're feeling it before it becomes real pathology, right? And, sometimes when women walk out of there, they're like, oh, I didn't get a, not a diagnosis, but, something like that. And in one case, that's a good thing because you don't want a diagnosis. You don't want something that you carry with you. But on the other hand, it feels kind of disappointing and confusing and frustrating because then you don't know what to work on. You don't know what to fix because you don't feel good. That's the first thing to bear in mind, is that the ranges are suboptimal. They're not showing what those markers should be for you to be feeling at your absolute best. And this is where, one, it's basic testing. Two, the ranges are just very, very broad. So kind of even as a general rule, what you want to look at is, you don't want to be close to the low end. You don't want to be close to the high end. You want to be sitting somewhere in the middle, right? If you just were to look at it generally, and that's not for all markers, but on a basic level, you want to be somewhere in the middle. So if your vitamin D is down at like 50 and your doctor's like, oh, it's within range, that's great. No, it should be much better than that, right? That's not an optimal level. That's basic. That's, not enough. Not enough for bone health and not enough for the immune system, etc. So that kind of thing.
And it's not that there's anything wrong with the conventional system. I think it has its purposes.
I think we've been conditioned to take our health to the doctor to fix it. There's a little bit of, well, I don't understand this, so I've got to go see the doctor and he or she is going to explain it to me. But there's definitely a shift now where people are taking personal responsibility for their health, and that's where it really needs to sit. Because, like I said, you live in your body, you know what you're doing, you know what you should be feeling, and only you can make those changes, but you have to be accountable to yourself. And so if you go to a GP and they don't give you the results that you want, well, either you get a second opinion or you take it upon yourself to pay for those pathology tests and get it done. Because the one thing I'll always say is that you might go, oh, I probably don't need that, right? Like, how often do we have in the group, like, we've got quite extensive pathology tests. We've got, like, you can do the more advanced, but these are the bulk of what we really encourage you to do. And I always say that if you don't do it now, you might have something 2 or 3 years down the track that could have been caught and could have been prevented if it was just checked.
Yeah.
And so that is the benefits of, pathology testing and looking at those optimal ranges to really find out where your health is headed and, inform part of your treatment plan. But it's prevention down the line or accurate treatment right now.
And as you said, we do see this a lot in the calls where there are kind of two barriers when it comes to the pathology results, right? The first one is getting the tests. So actually going into the doctor and saying, I need these tests. And you do talk about it a lot in your program about how to get the doctor to listen to you, how to get them to really hear you and not feel like, okay, I need to go in and I'm not going to be heard, I'm not going to be seen. Really advocating for yourself in that matter. So the first barrier that we see a lot is just even getting the tests done, going to the GP and saying, hey, I need all these tests, and them kind of just saying, well, you look fine, or, we can't do that one, or we can't do this one, and they're kind of doing maybe 70% of them, and then women are having to find other avenues to get that extra 30% done. Because and it's unfortunate to see, but I think there is, like you said, there's this movement for women to really advocate for themselves and take action, right? There's a difference between having somebody say, oh, you can't, or oh, I'm not going to do this on your behalf, and then taking responsibility and then going and doing it yourself. So that's kind of the first barrier that we see.
When you go to see the doctor and he's like, where did you get this from? Why do you want these tests? It's a little bit patronizing, right?
Yes.
Can be, not all the time. It can be
intimidating too.
Yeah, so women are intimidated to ask, but you have to understand he may be a doctor, but he's not the expert on your body. Like, you are the expert on your body. You know how you feel. You know when something's off. And just because you're going, like, I encourage women because you're doing the work. Like, you're being proactive. You're health conscious. So you're going to him being health conscious and asking for these tests, it does not mean that he is right and you are wrong.
Yes.
And I think that's the attitude that you have to go in there with, is like, just because he doesn't see or feel what I feel does not make his interpretation right and mine wrong. Like, I want to have these tests done. I want to find out what's going on. I want my life back. Do you know? I want to feel better. So yeah, just because he's a medical doctor and expert on the human body, he's not an expert on your body.
And then so the second barrier that I see a lot in the calls when it comes to pathology tests is also interpreting the results. So we did talk about the optimal ranges, but I've heard you mention many times there are so many other factors that go into it: lifestyle, context, symptoms, stress, like all of these different things that play into how a reading can be done. And is there an optimal time to get tests, or how much could stress impact a pathology review or a pathology reading? How do these factors play into that?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, you know that for when we recommend the lab tests that we want to see, we also give guidance on how to have those taken, such as in the morning, don't be running around stressed and trying to squeeze it in. Like, you really want to have a slow morning, because we are checking cortisol, right? Your stress hormone. Like, we don't want it to be extremely high based on your morning events. So yeah, that's one, making sure you're not having a rushed morning, making sure you're not sick. Like, if you've been sick with an infection, like, don't go in, like, wait till that fully passes. Lots of water, fasting, but really trying not to have a stressful morning going in, because it will throw off some of your readings. And same if you've been sick, right? That'll definitely throw off your readings, because throw off a lot of different markers, which won't be accurate. So yeah, you really want to prep for the test. You really want to go in there and make time for it.
Why do you feel that people trust the tests more than their own body? What kind of conditioning do you think is there?
Good question. I think we've just been white lab coat programmed. Do you know? I mean, not that doctors wear white lab coats anymore, but we've just been programmed. It's just like, that's my personal opinion. Like, it's just like when a police officer pulls me over if I get a breath test or something, I automatically feel like I'm guilty of something, even though I'm not, right? But it's just the programming. And I think that it's been indoctrinated into us that the doctor is, he knows best. But that's changing, right? Women are really challenging what they see, and they're really being proactive, which is great. Like, one of the things I'll say to women is that when you go in there, just explain to them, like, these are the tests that I've looked up that I want, or I've been recommended by my naturopath to get, because I'm being proactive about my health. Because I'm not going to sit around and wait for a chronic disease or something to go wrong. I know I don't feel right, and I want to be proactive and on top of this and take care of myself and take full accountability for my health. And I think that says a lot if you were to say that to a doctor, because it's like, okay, that's someone who really wants to take care of themselves.
I think you're right. I think there is a move now towards reclaiming our own sense of autonomy, our own sense of understanding what's going on in our bodies. I think especially as women, we have a deep innate sense of ourselves, and you look back many generations, and in old traditional medicine, it's always women who are the carriers of the knowledge of medicine, and feeling into the body and feeling what's wrong, using more natural means to cure these ailments that people have. And I think, yeah, like you said, at one point there was kind of this push for indoctrinating people into believing what was happening in more Western science, a move away from traditional sciences, Eastern sciences. That's great. I think that we need both. I think that there is a place for Western science in the medical field, but I think that the more we speak up about the intelligence in our own body and knowing what's wrong with our own body, the more important it becomes to look at other avenues of medicine rather than just the traditional or the conventional sense that we've been so embedded in for so long.
Yeah, agree. You really, again, just understanding the cues from your body. Like, your body is giving you signals through those symptoms. Like, that needs to be looked at. And no one knows it best than the person living in that body. Mm-hmm. I do want to add one thing, which is, if you're in this position where your doctor won't do further testing, or you don't know what testing to do, okay, that's definitely another one. And we talk about that a lot in our programs. We have a whole list, but you can order the tests yourself. And you can do that online really easily. And, there's places like i-screen.com.au or .nz. There's Ulta Health, ULTA in the US. So there are places online where you can order the test yourself. And I really encourage you to do that, because if you already know that going to the GP is going to be an issue for you, that you can't get what you want tested, then pay out of pocket, pay for it yourself. Because if something's missed, like I said, it could be missed for years. And then eventually down the line in 5 years' time, you'll be like, I wish I had just checked that. Like, why didn't I check that years ago, right? I would hate someone to be in that position, right? Just to kind of rehash on this episode, I think what we're saying is advocate for yourself, right? You are the expert of your body. No one else can be the expert of your body. Like, people can guide you, and we definitely guide women every day, but if you were to say to me, but first I feel like this, I'd be like, nope, all of your results look fine. There's nothing wrong there. Like, that would be so crazy for me to just ignore someone, because they know, right? So I think advocating for yourself, taking accountability, taking responsibility, which means those follow-up actions to improve your health, whatever that looks like. And I think that if you're just relying on the doctor, I don't know. I wouldn't. I really wouldn't. That would be my closing advice, because it's such a narrow, like Melissa was saying, it's really important that we incorporate Western scientists, Western medicine, right? But it's one part when we have thousands of years of traditional medicine at our disposal that can help us regain our health and longevity and, operate at a much higher level. But we need to look at everything. So I hope this episode was helpful. And if you see an ability to leave a comment, I'd love for you to leave a comment, because I know that this situation happens so often for women that they, don't get the test they want, their symptoms are ignored. And so I just want you to know that if you're feeling not right, check, do what it takes to get those tests done, find out what tests you need, get them done, pay for them yourself, whatever you have to do to find out exactly what's going on for you is really important. And that's a part of being proactive and taking care of yourself and being accountable. So if you can leave a comment, please do so below.